everyone, this is Hua. This is the continuation of Yelena. Please be sure to find the previous parts in the videos on my channel. I hope that you enjoy, and if you have not subscribed yet, please help subscribe and support me and many of the other YouTubers. Thank you so much. Enjoy! Tom pulled the reins on the horse as it neared the house for it to slow down. They had been tricked. They had been led 400 miles the wrong way just so the criminals could escape. He'd been bickering all morning long, and as he got off the horse, he found Nettie running out to meet him. It wasn't her running that frightened him. It was her expression that made his skin crawl. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. "Nettie, what's wrong?" he asked. "She's gone. I woke up this morning and found Emily eating breakfast alone. Yelena is missing." He caught his breath in his chest. He stormed past her and up into the room where she slept. It was empty, and he saw that she slept in the bed at some point in the night. The blankets were twisted over, and one edge fell off the bed. He bent down, picked it up, and tossed it back onto the bed. And then something caught his nose. Something awful. He knelt down again, and the smell intensified. He crouched lower and found a cloth near the end of the bed. He picked it up and brought it to his nostrils. Bleach. He turned and ran back down the stairs, almost knocking Emily off of her feet at the bottom. "Did you hear anything?" he asked. She was twirling her hair with her fingers. "No." Irritated, he grabbed her shoulders. "You slept right across the hall and you heard nothing." Shrugging her shoulders out of his hold, she replied, "I'm a deep sleeper." He let out an angry breath and walked past her. Outside, Two-Faced and Bobby were untying the saddle. Instead of taking the stairs, he jumped over the railing, and they both looked up at him in surprise. Nettie was standing beside him with tears in her eyes. "I heard nothing, Tom. I'm sorry," she said. "It's not your fault. Someone took her." "How do you know that?" He raised the cloth in his hand. Sat up the horse would track her. The mansion was lit up like firework as Yelena came down the stairs from her room. She'd been given some rich gowns to wear, and she felt as if she was being led to believe a fairy tale she knew would end up in tragedy. The gown she was wearing was deep red with ruby gems on the neckline. Her hair was curled and pinned on top of her head. She felt strange, awkward, and afraid she'd fall down on her face if she didn't walk right. She wasn't fit for this lifestyle. She reached the dining hall and found Adam had returned and was sitting at the end of the table wearing a black tux. When she entered, he smiled, got up, and pulled out a chair for her to sit beside him. "Thank you," she said as she sat down. He smiled. "You are most welcome. You look beautiful. I hope you found everything to your liking." "This is more than enough, Governor." "Please don't address me so formally, Yelena. I'd like you to address me by Adam. I like to look at you as an equal. If you should need anything, let me know, and I'll have my servants take care of it." She nodded as he poured her some wine. When he handed her the glass, he made sure their fingers touched. She swallowed down the urge to throw up as she smiled and took the glass from him. She took a sip and felt the liquid go smoothly down her throat. She watched as his eyes continued to focus on her. I never get a chance to talk to you in private. It's always something going on at the banquet ball. Someone is always asking you to dance, or I'm being led to give a speech. I feel as if we were to share a moment together. We'd be best friends," Adam said as he took a sip of wine. She looked away and forced a smile. "You're being quite forward, Governor Brown." "Oh, forgive me." She sighed. "Look, thank you for bringing me back home, but I would feel much more comfortable being in a suite at the local hotel. I'll stay tonight, but tomorrow I'd like to leave. I'll work on fixing my father's inn when I have the money." "Well, if it's money you need, I can certainly help you out." No, please don't. I won't have anything to pay you back with." "Well, I don't want you to pay me back. Can I be frank with you, Yelena?" Yelena nodded. He moved his chair closer to hers. And then he reached over and took her hand in his. When she tried to pull away, he tightened his grip. His eyes were telling her to sit still, and she felt her heart race. Yelena, I am in love with you. I have loved you for as long as I can remember, and I can't find a way to stop. If you don't allow me to love you openly and freely, I'm afraid I'll go insane. When I found your inn in ruins, I was so afraid of losing you before being able to tell you how much I loved you that I nearly had a heart attack. I want to take care of you. And now with your father gone, it's time for me to step in and do my duty. She frowned. Your duty? You make it sound like it's a job. It is my job. It's my job to take care of you and to love you. Give me that honor, please. She pried her hands free from his. Governor Brown, I am beyond flattered that you should want me that much. But I want the man I am going to marry to be someone I love too. You're a great man, I am sure, but you're not someone I want to spend the rest of my life with. You'll learn to love me. Yelena laughed. That's just it. I shouldn't have to learn to love you. It should be from the moment I laid eyes on you. I have to feel something for you in order for a marriage or a relationship to work. You can't force me to will my heart to want you. It doesn't work that way, Governor. But I love you. Yelena lowered her eyes. Will that be enough for you? He didn't answer. Yelena sighed and pushed her chair back. She stood up and stared at him. The silence in the air ate at her, and she pushed the chair back in as she walked away. Then she turned around and looked at him. Perhaps I should leave tonight. It won't make things harder than it is. You'll understand one day, Governor, why I say this. The ruins to the inn were ash-covered and black as Yelena watched the air lift the dust and ashes. The sun was beginning to set as she stood there in front of the ruined inn. She'd left the mansion and came straight to see the house she grew up in. It looked like a haunting, weeping ghost that carried too many memories. She walked to the front steps and sighed deeply as tears ran down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Father, she said. She started crying and fell to the ground, sobbing. Every memory she had shared with him was now here, singing around her and killing her. She could hear his voice calling to her and hear her laughter when she was happy. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting on the ground crying until she felt arms wrapped around her. She thought he was the governor and moved away so fast that she almost fell over. But when she turned around, she found Tom staring at her. Shocked, she stood up and wiped her eyes. What are you doing here? She asked. I tracked you. It wasn't hard. With the tracks I found, I knew whoever took you was taking you home. Who was it? Anger shot through her, and she shouted back at him. Why does it matter? Whoever it was brought me back home where I belong. You should leave. Why are you upset at me? Because you're trespassing. It was you who killed my father, and you who took everything away from me. I hate you. I hate you. He reached her in a few strides and grabbed her shoulders, pinching her flesh. Fine. Hate me if you want, but know that I won't let you go that easily. I made a promise to myself that I would take care of you because it was my fault that your father died. It is in my debt, and I will fulfill it. So I am not leaving you here, no matter how much you beg me to. You'll go with me to the end of the earth if that is the case. She jerked herself free. Never. I hate you. I hate you. Her last words were cut off when he slammed his lips against hers. He slammed her body against him, and she felt his muscles beneath the palm of her hands. She brought up her hands to separate them, but he grabbed her wrists in one hand and held them behind her back as he made love to her lips. When he had his fill, he pulled away and stared at her. Say it. Say you hate me, Tom whispered. I hate you, she cried. He brought his lips down on hers and gave her a deep kiss that almost sucked the life out of her throat. When he pulled away, she was breathless and panting as he stared at her. She watched as a smile came across his handsome face. Say you hate me again, he threatened. She pulled herself free from him and stepped back. I hate you. He reached her in one stride and gathered her up in his arms. I'm going to teach you a lesson on manners. Seems like your mouth needs a good washing. You should practice what you preach. You have no manners. Didn't your mother ever teach you not to touch a woman like this? She immediately regretted it the moment the words came out, because the lights died in his eyes, and she remembered how his mother had lived. He let her go, and a darkness came over his face that frightened her. She took a step back. Good you reminded me, Yelena. I promise I will not touch you until you ask for it. And believe me, you will be begging for it. Get on the horse, we're going home, he said. She stood her ground and stomped her foot. No, this is my home, and I'm not leaving. You're the stranger here. If anyone is leaving, it is you. He narrowed his eyes. Either you get on that horse nicely, or I will make you beg for something that will make your cheeks blush for a week. It was midnight when they arrived at Tom's house. All the lights were on, and she could see Nettie pacing back and forth on the porch. She saw another figure in the den on the couch, and she assumed it was Emily. He helped her off the horse, and she walked to the front porch. Nettie came down the stairs and threw her arms around her. Oh, my dear girl, I'm so glad to see you're alive and well. I was so worried about you, she said as she pulled away. Thank you, I'm fine. What happened? Before she could answer, Tom came by and took her by the elbow and began dragging her toward the house. She tried to free herself, but he kept a strong hold. The house was warm and smelled of something good, which made her stomach growl. She tore herself free and stumbled over the kitchen chair as Emily came into the living room. Where have you been? Do you know how worried we all were? She asked. Yelena straightened herself up. It's not as if I intended to run away. Emily smirked. You've always wanted to be a good girl, Yelena. Well, guess what? This time around, the good girl in you lost. You gave us all enough to worry about, so give up the act. Yelena pushed past her and up the stairs. She heard chattering and slammed the door to the room. She walked to the bed and sat down, letting out a deep breath. Back to square one. The door to the room opened, and Tom walked in. When he closed the door, she stood up. Who took you? He asked. Why do you need to know? Did you know who they were? Yes, I did. He raised his eyebrows. Really? You know, when people I know try to save me, they tend to use bleach to knock me out, too. Does that ring a bell? She turned away from him. It had been bothering her, too, why that was the case in her rescue, if you could call it that. I've been trying to figure that out myself. Governor Brown only said that he didn't want to alert anyone on the ranch. Tom marched across the room and snatched her arm to turn her around to look at him. What did you say? She frowned and pulled her arm free. You're hurting me. He ran a hand through his hair. You said Governor Brown. Yes, he's the governor of the town I live in. That can't be right. How can that be? The Governor Brown I know is a criminal who kidnaps women for trafficking. What are you talking about? He's been the governor for the past 3 years now. You must be thinking of someone else. Tall, eyes as blue as the sea, and a broom up his ass? Yelena laughed. You've just described yourself. That wasn't meant to be funny, Tom said. She stopped laughing. How can the man you think and the one I think be the same one? I mean, how many Governor Browns are there? You're mistaken. Besides, he wouldn't hurt me. Well, how do you know that? I just do. I'm sure that his men were afraid of waking up the criminals that lived here, so they decided to drug me. It might have been easier to get in and out of. I'm fine now, aren't I? I'm alive and well. No need to worry about that. Now, if you leave me, I need to take a bath. I'm tired, and if you haven't forgotten, I've been through an ordeal. I haven't forgotten, which is why I'm going to sleep in here. Yelena froze. What? You cannot sleep in here. But he had already started to undress. And if those men should come back again, do you want to be drugged with bleach and taken away? I'm going to protect you, and to do that, I must be close to you. No, Tom, you're taking this protector job too seriously. I'm fine. I have Nettie and Emily. They can alert you. Tom smiled. Those two didn't hear a peep when they came in here the last time. What makes you think you rely on them? The shadows of the trees played ghosts with Tom as he lay on the ground, listening to Yelena breathe. Why the hell did he volunteer to sleep here with her? It was hard enough being away from her, but now he had to lay here and listen to her soft moans when she dreamt. It was killing him, and he had been tossing and turning for hours. He took a deep breath and sat up, no longer needing sleep. He kicked the blankets off of him and stood up. He walked to the window and pushed the curtains aside. The moon was full and high tonight. It was a night like this that his mother died, and he hated nights like this. It brought back too many hurtful memories. The group he was after had led him in a circle because they knew he was coming. Someone had leaked out information. The question was who. He knew that he trusted Two-Faced and Bobby with his life, but he also had a lot of enemies who had seen or heard of his movement and probably alerted him. He had been waiting for a shipment of young girls who had been kidnapped for trafficking. But then, he was led in a wrong way that led him to find nothing. He turned around and stared at Yelena sleeping on the bed. Her eyes were closed and one hand lay on her chest, while the other lay on her head. She looked so peaceful that he wanted to watch her forever. He smiled, knowing she was safe. But the thought of her being hurt still haunted him. When he heard of Governor Brown's name, it sent him on a whirlwind of emotions. From what he knew, Governor Adam Brown was a man who'd hid behind a figure of public authority, but behind doors, he was the biggest human trafficker. Tom had been trying to find him for years, but he had no idea where he was located because each time he would get close to finding him, the man was always 2 steps ahead of him. He was rich, so he bought off people, including sheriffs and the townspeople, to keep voting for him. His hands curled into a fist when he thought about what the governor planned with Yelena. He wasn't going to let him take her away from him. He'd made the mistake of bringing death to her father, but if he had to go through hell to protect her, he would. He wasn't going to make another mistake when it came to her again. He hardly knew her, but the feeling he felt for her when it came to her safety made him want to give up his life. He knew he wanted to protect her. He walked to sit beside her on the bed and lifted a finger to brush the strand of hair away from her face. What was it about her that tugged at his heart? He liked arguing with her because it lit fires in her eyes, and when her eyes were lit, it felt as if the world and bright lights for him to see. He liked kissing her. It was as if those lips of hers were sugar and made for him. He smiled when he thought of how he had stolen her first kiss. "You stubborn lass," he whispered. "Last night, Governor Brown told me that he had men stationed here," Yelena said, as they were getting ready to leave the bedroom. "Did he?" "Yes, because he only brought me with him and not Emily. I was worried about her safety, and he said he had men here who alerted him that there were movements." Tom laughed. "If he had men here, which he doesn't, they'd be piling up for him to come gather. Trust me, he was lying." She frowned. "Why would he lie to me?" "Perhaps he could, and he just wanted you off his back. Whatever his reason, you're back here and you're safe. He won't be bothering you, and if he does, I'll deal with him." She shook her head. "No, he's going to come back for me." "How do you know that?" "Because he loved..." She stopped and then turned away. He watched her, and then he walked around to face her. She had her eyes at her feet. He cupped her face and forced her to look up at him. She was avoiding his eyes, and she knew why. She couldn't tell the truth that she loved him. Something kicked hard in his chest, and it hurt. He wasn't sure why it should bother him that the governor and her were in love. He dropped his hand. "I'll be heading out to town later. Don't leave the ranch." After a silent breakfast, Tom headed to the barn to saddle up the horses to go to town. Two-Face and Bobby were already saddling their horses. He was all thumbs as he tried to work the saddle. Bobby noticed and walked over to help him. Tom helped him and turned away and found Emily walking toward them dressed in a light blue cotton gown. She was smiling, and he felt annoyed by her presence. Tom, I need some items in town. Is it all right if I come with you? I promise I won't give you any trouble," she said sweetly. Before Tom could answer, Two-Face replied, "Where we're going, it's unwise for ladies to come along. It's best if you stay with Nettie and Miss Yelena." She ignored him as she slipped her hands along Tom's arms. "Can I? I promise I'll be silent as death." Tom sighed. Fine. Get in. Yelena tossed the gown over the line and brushed the sweat off of her brows. It was hot, and she was sweating. It was a good thing that Emily had gone with Tom, or else she'd never hear the end of it. Nettie was working on lunch inside, and she hoped that it was something good because this morning she'd been too angry to eat breakfast and was now starving. She was angry at how Tom let Emily go with him when he had spent the night with her and didn't ask if she wanted to come along. What was it about that man that drove her toward wanting to jump off a cliff? Sure, he was handsome, and when he smiled, all the stars seemed to align, and when his lips touched hers, she was swimming in a pool of everlasting desire. But he also drove her insane with his deep thoughts and secret mind, and she barely knew him. What did he do as a side business? Why was he searching for those people? What did he keep in his room? Yelena's head jerked up when she realized something she hadn't before. Tom was gone. He was gone, away from the home, and she was alone. She nearly giggled out loud at her stupidity for not knowing earlier that today was the day she'd find out the truth about him if she wanted to know. She left the water alone and hurried inside. She heard Nettie humming in the kitchen and hurried up the stairs without making too much noise. But her hopes were shattered when she found Tom's room was locked. She sighed and walked past Emily's room when she noticed that the door wasn't closed tightly. She walked to close it when she saw something inside that made her heart sink. She opened the door and walked in, closing it behind her. Peeking out from underneath the blanket were corners of papers. They were hidden beneath the blanket, but it looked as if this morning she had been in a rush and had not hidden it well. She pulled out the photograph and saw that it was of her and the governor. Her jaw hit the floor, and she shook her head at the raw lies that Adam had fed her. In the photograph, Emily and Adam were holding hands, smiling at each other. She reached for the first letter and read it. My darling Emily, I am beyond insane with missing you. I haven't found a moment where I do not think of you. When will we be together again? Each day when the sun rises, I think of how we spend the night together. I yearn for your body and I ache for your kisses. I will endure this for our future. I will endure it for our children we will have together. Yelena shook her head, amazed at how she had swallowed up the lies Emily had fed her. She tucked the letter back to where she had found it and walked out, hearing a clutter in the kitchen. She walked down the stairs and found Nettie on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. She ran to the woman and had just held her in the arms when she felt the butt of a gun on her head. She felt faint and her vision blurred as she fell over. Thank you for joining. Part 5 will be out shortly.